Hello everyone, this is Mighty Scum here with another episode of Feed the Beast Revelation, and this is episode 25, and now we will do the updates. And to continue on with our theme of Fallout, I did a little remodeling to the front of the base. I did find a record that would add to the theme. And if you're not familiar with that record, it is The Wanderer, and it was popular with a lot of the Fallout 4 trailers when they first launched the game. And here is the disc. It's actually from NuclearCraft, and it's The Wanderer, an 8-bit cover. So I'm working on making this look more post-apocalyptic, and I just need to do something with all this blue up here. But that's it for the updates. Alright, so we are actually going to work on this episode, and it'll be NuclearCraft, and it'll be the beginning of NuclearCraft. The things you can do, the things you have to do before you get deeply into this mod. So I will try my hardest to explain what NuclearCraft is and how to succeed in building the fission reactors. We will not get to the fusion reactors or any of the other lower tier generators. There's quite a few ways to make power, and a lot of it still got NuclearCraft. So as you can see, there's several generators within NuclearCraft, and but mostly this mod revolves around. There's also solar panels. This mod mostly revolves around there are fission and fusion reactors, and so it's sort of a progression system in a sense that you only can start off with 2 different types of fuels. So down here you see all these fuels, and there's regular fuels, and there's depleted versions. So the basics of NuclearCraft is you have to run fuel through a reactor of some sort, and it will produce a depleted fuel. So the one I'll just give you the example of the one we're going to use, which is the Tbu Fuel Rod System, and it's the very first fuel rod you can use, other than the uranium ones. They are uranium ones, but this one will get us the stuff that we need as well. And this is also the safest one to start off with. So I'm going to start off with this one so that anybody can just watch this and then say, okay, this is how I can build my first 1000 RF per tick reactor easily, and it's safe, and I don't have to worry about it. So the first thing we do is we have to build all the machinery for this, and that's probably going to take a majority of this episode. So I'll just go through the process now, and then we will get into the actual demonstration and show you the machinery that is required to get going with this. So the Tbu fuel, it comes from Thorium 232, so this is just a 9 Thorium 232, and it forms a Tbu fuel, which you can then make into the fuel rod. There is another version of this Tbu fuel, and it's oxidized. And so just about every version of a fuel rod has another fuel version, which is a little bit more efficient. So if I were to do a whole shift, you can see the base power is 60 RF per tick. The base heat generation is 18 heat per tick. And if I go over the oxidized fuel rod, the base is 84 RF per tick, and the base heat is 22.5. So you get a bigger jump in power with a little more heat added onto it. So the mini game with the reactors is trying to balance heat and RF, and a lot of this it starts off easy. So as we get into actually building it, I will explain a little bit more about balancing the heat and the RF. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But the biggest thing here is that you just have to know that there are a lot of overwhelming options for fuel, but a lot of these options are not accessible early on. And I like this mod in particular amongst better than others, is because it gradually brings you into the system and then gets you to learning in a safe environment, and then you can kind of go crazy and build the I think I've seen up to 500,000 RF per tick. So that's 500,000 RF per tick. And those reactors are incredibly big. I think they're 25 by 25. And so they get to be very big reactors and require a lot of moving parts. So just know that this is a mid to end game system. This system will take you to the end game. But it does require a lot of time to get going with that. And there are ways to speed this up. So let's get into the first thing. And I started building some more pulverizers because I never did anything with the stuff that I needed to get. So you will need to get some thorium. So I would say step one, get some thorium and start pulverizing it. I think I was not finished building this, so let's grab some more duct. And we need some impulse item ducts. There we go. I did build some filters too. So I'm going to dedicate these two on the end do I need to do this auto output if I turn it on? Auto output in the back. Okay, I need to get some servos for that. And essentially what you want to do is you want to break this down. Oh, it did go, which takes a little while. We're going to break this down into the thorium. Let's look at this. Thorium, I think it's pulverized thorium or crushed. Thorium dust. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is just break it down into thorium dust. And you can make the bars if you want. Not required. Because if you look at the actual usage for this, you could smelt it into bars, obviously, but then you want to go to the Isotope Separator. So this is the first machine we're going to actually use, but it's not the first machine we actually need to build, because we do need to build other machines to get to this machine. And I'll explain that in a second. But we see that we get thorium dust turns into 2 thorium-232. And remember, we need 90 of these to turn into a fuel cell. And then we could turn a fuel cell into a one of these fuel rods. So we get the fuel, and we turn it to a fuel rod by just combining it with an empty one. This is actually pretty easy to make. This is just tin and iron. And actually, I can just make just 2 stacks of it, or just 1 stack, I guess, for now. And it's pretty cheap. All right, so you definitely want to get this going first, the thorium dust. Get it being created, because you will need a decent amount of that. And the next thing we will need to do is work on the machines. I actually had to build an alloy one for the tough alloy, and I needed that to make the disc that I made. So I made the alloy furnace for the discs, and there's actually 3 discs. Yeah, there's this one, and there's the End of the World, which is another part of the Fallout series. It's another song in the radio. And then there's the Dire Straits, Money for Nothing. So, and this does require you make the tough alloy. Now you will need tough alloy when you're making the for the reactor casings. So this is where you start getting into the machines here. The first machine we need to make is the Isotope Separator. You could make the manufacturing, but all that does right now is just pulverize the stuff. We already have a pulverizer. So we need to make the Isotope Separator. This requires Pharaoh boron alloy, and this requires you to make the alloy furnace. And so what I'm actually going to do is pick this up and move it down here. And let's put it right here for now. I can just run the power directly to it. Alright, so in order to make the Pharaoh boron alloy, you just need to take steel and boron. And so boron, you find that in the ground. I have tons of that stuff. I think that's thorium. That's boron. Yeah, I have 24 stacks of it. You do have a lot of, you do get a lot of resources for this mod if you don't use it early on. And the thorium is a main part of it. That's how you get the rest of the fuel cells. You can use uranium as well. I wanted to point that out. You can put uranium in one of the isotope separators. So if I look up the separator, you get uranium-238 and 235. And the 238 you can use to make MOX fuel, but it does require plutonium. You can make an LEU 233 fuel. So you can go the route of actually the uranium route. I'm not going to do that in this episode just because I wanted to use the thorium up that I have. But you can use up the uranium and the yellowite, which converts to uranium actually when you run it through the machines. Alright, so we need power. We'll need a decent amount of power. There we go. And so now we need to make the Pharaoh boron. So you will need a good amount of steel. I have about 100, a little over 100. And do I have boron? I have a little bit of boron. So I will show you how this works, but we will need to go through and actually make the boron. What I'm going to do is actually make 2 more. I'll dedicate these pulverizers to just NuclearCraft. So I'm going to filter out all the NuclearCraft to go to these pulverizers, and then have it go into another furnace, just like this setup right here. Same exact setup, just over here, and it'll be dedicated to NuclearCraft. So underneath, I have my filters, and I'll filter out the NuclearCraft stuff. So it will accept just NuclearCraft. And I'll probably do that off camera. So for now, I'm just going to have it make the boron, and we'll run it through this. These machines, I think, are designed to be incredibly slow for whatever reason. But they like these, there's a speed upgrade you can do, so it's not bad to make. But man, it uses a lot of power. So right now we're using 10 RF per tick. So I'm going to make a speed upgrade for this. Actually, I'll probably make 3 of them. But the power usage jumps a lot. We don't need the... So let's make 3 of these. They're very cheap to make, and you will need them if you are impatient. So the power jumps to 100 RF per tick, and that it was 10 when we started, so now it's 100. So this is the first indicator that you can start this early on and have things processing automatically and use less power. But if you get to it and then you want to like rapidly go through it, or you want to put everything in an episode, then this makes it much faster, but it also uses up a lot more power. So we have 16. So you now want to make, with your 16 boron, the separator. It requires an alloy furnace, so we actually need to make the alloy furnace, which requires a manufacturing, which requires these copper solenoids, which are really cheap to make, and piston. So let's go through this process now. Let's make the solenoids. I probably should just automate this stuff. And then we need the alloy furnace. Oh, I'm going to need to make these the plates. So the plates are require graphite dust and lead. I think I might have that still. No, I need to get the graphite dust. So graphite's actually really easy to make. It's just charcoal, really, and you just smelt it. So let's get rid of this. All right, so we have our graphite. We're going to make it into dust now, and it should be outputting into. Let's turn that on, and we can now make the. All right, two per dust. This is thorium dust. Just throw that in there for now. There we go. So we have our platings. So we can make an alloy furnace. And now we need to make our isotope separator, which requires the Pharaoh boron alloy, and it also requires the plates. So these are different plates. These are advanced plates. And it requires a basic plate plus tough alloy. Okay, so tough alloy is the Pharaoh boron plus the lithium. And lithium, I didn't do that yet. So it requires a lot of processing, and what I should have did was I should have just started processing this beforehand. I don't know. I didn't think properly. And so this progression system is pretty nice. I do like it. I like how you spend the time, and the more you learn, the more it benefits you from this mod. So you build the machines, and the progression system for the machines is actually pretty simple too. It does not require a whole lot of knowledge or even materials. All materials are easy to gather. Like you see here, we have tons and tons of this stuff. 21 stacks of boron, some magnesium, 9 stacks of magnesium, lots of lithium, and so all this stuff is just easy to get. So now we have our tough alloy. I do need to make some more plates, and so we will need 4 more plates, which is going to require some more graphite, which I should have now. I think I've been smelting it, or I've been pulverizing the graphite ingots. And so the charcoal, you can use charcoal for this to make the graphite, and I have tons of charcoal. 768 stacks of charcoal. So I think this is actually backed up. Yeah, this is actually backed up. So I have more charcoal than I actually will need. And with these plates, 2 more. Let's drop this all in there. Let's make some advanced plates now. It's more tough alloy, which comes from this. Might need a little bit more actually. Nope, just enough. Alright, now we can make our isotope separator. There we go. So now you're getting into the fun part where you actually can start separating the different components out of the materials you have. And I'm just going to switch so the speed upgrades around. So now let's get our thorium, and this is the first stage for the thorium. We're going to build a thorium fission reactor. And as you see, it's going to craft it into its base components. This thing does use a decent amount of power. And it requires, even with 3, and I'm using 100 RF per tick, it's only going, not a very fast speed. So these blocks remind me of the old school blocks in that you have to pipe specifically into the top, but then the back you have to pipe out the back or the sides. So they're kind of, you can't just access things from all different sides of it. There's specific sides that it will only pipe in and out of. So I'll just do a simple example for this for now. Let's get a hopper. let's get a servo chest. So I'll just show you how this works. Actually, I probably could pipe it back to this. Let's just do that. So the outputs will come from the back. And we can just do that there. So it should come out from the back. Yeah, there it is. And we're getting our thorium isotopes. The other one, the little tiny piles, it does have a use. So don't throw that away. And then the top, I'll just do this for the top for now. So I'll just fill this up and continue processing. I want to get the thorium, make sure the thorium's going, because you will need a lot of thorium. And so we have 232, then the 230. The 230, you can't turn it into fuel. There's some blocks you can't turn into fuel. But you can use it though. It's useful for specific things, and this mod tries to be realistic in its approach to all the different types of nuclear materials and stuff like that. So when you have your 230, so your lower tier thorium, you can turn it into depleted blocks, essentially. And the blocks you can craft into a helium collector. Now, helium is highly important later on. So you can create this structure here. It's pretty easy to make. And then start collecting helium from that, which I will do once I get enough of this 230 thorium. So just keep that in mind. You want to keep this thorium 230, which is a byproduct in tiny clumps of the other thorium. So you definitely want to keep that. And you also want to make sure you have enough of this dust. I'll automate this whole process so that all this stuff is being created. So after we get our thorium, it takes a little while. You may just want to leave this game running for a little while, or if you're on a server, just kind of keep logged in while this is processing. You also could put in more speed upgrades. Alright, so once we get enough thorium, 232, then you want to make it into the fuel cells. So you now have Tbu fuel cells. Alright, so the option now that you have your fuel cells is you can put them into the fuel rods. You can do that regardless. So you can actually just throw them right in the fuel rods. But you can also do oxidation. So you can get the Tbu oxidized fuel cells. Like I said before, the power difference, it's a slight increase in power difference. But the process to actually get them oxidized, it requires extra steps to do that. And it also requires a fluid infuser. And so you have to build the fluid infuser, and you also have to get oxygen for it. And so oxygen is created by an electrolyzer or a chemical reactor, but that's later on. So you can electrolyze it. There's two different electrolyzers. There's one from advanced rocketry, where you convert water into oxygen, hydrogen. But you have the NuclearCraft one, which turns it into hydrogen, oxygen, and deuterium. And so you need to pipe out liquids into 3 different tanks. These two are the same block. I don't know why it's 3 different ones, but I think it's just more realistic. Water is H2O, so H2, then O, and this is deuterium, which is a part of hydrogen. So I like the realistic feel of it. I like this. You get the actual H2O out of your water. All right, so essentially what we need to do is build an electrolyzer, and then take the oxygen output from that, and then you put it into the fluid infuser, which you can then oxidize make oxides out of all of your fuels. And this is like just an increase in power production. and heat. So you have to keep that in mind. It increases both of those. So it kind of makes it more efficient and more efficient fuel. And it works for just about all of the fuel types, as you can see. And you can even do the rods. So we can just make our rods. And there we go. We have our fuel rods ready. And I can oxidize them now. I can oxidize them later. I will postpone the oxidize step till later, and it may wind up being in the next episode. But I do want to get straight to the fission, because I know you will probably want to see how the fission reactor works. Alright, so now that we have our fuel, let's just look up, I think it's reactor casing. So the bare minimum you need, this is the bare minimum, is the fuel, not the fuel rod, not that. This is extreme reactors. You need the extreme reactor. Okay, it's down here. You at least need the reactor casing, and there's a transparent version of that, and you also need the cells. So you need the casing and the cell. The fission controller. So this is the block that actually controls the entire fission reactor. So this is, I guess, is the third thing you absolutely need to have is a controller. And it tells you right here, you need reactor cells, casings, and then you can do cooler blocks and graphite blocks, which are optional, but you definitely will want to do those later on. Especially the coolers, you definitely need to have a cooler. I would recommend getting a cooler now while you're building the first set, because you can produce more power that way, and you don't have to monitor it as much. And I do want to point out, this reactor in this mod pack at this time does not explode. What it does is it melts down and it turns some of the reactor blocks into lava. So you can easily mitigate that by putting it in its own separate room, but you don't need to have the blast resistant blocks. So when you're building this, just keep that in mind. You don't need the blast resistant blocks, and you can easily contain any failures. Alright, so I'm going to make this stuff up, and which requires elite plating. So you have to get this crystal binder stuff, and this is where you start getting into the rhodochrosite crystals, and you also get into the magnesium diboride. This is like a science project here. So you have to get a little more, a few more things going. This is not hard to make. This is just, you combine magnesium, dust, sulfate, which you have tons of this stuff. We get this from the, we get the sulfur from coal ore, and we also get it from blazes. And then all this is just crushed rhodochrosite crystals, which we have lots of these. That comes from redstone. So we have 86 here, but then we also have a bunch up here. 239. So let me work on this, and I will go through and kind of explain. I'm also going to automate this up too. We'll automate the processing of all this stuff, and I'll just throw it in this chest right here and have it automate all the stuff, put it back in the system. So I'll build it, and then I'll show you how it works after that. That'll probably be the quickest way to do this for you. All right, I am back, and I have I made a Fission Controller, which, oops, that's not it either. Fission Controller. So it requires some advanced processing of some materials. This, I think I showed you this recipe already. Boron ingots, it's pretty easy to make. You get the boron from the ground. You will need to get uranium 238. And so how I did that was I just took some yellow Uranium and I pulverized it. And so you get a dust, uranium dust out of it. Like this. So it's uranium grit. And then take uranium grit and then you stick it into the Isotope Separator, and it will produce the uranium isotopes, which is 235. Actually, it's not 235. It produces the tiny 235. It should filter in here. There it goes. So it also produces 238. So 238 is the one that you're going to need for this. 238. So that's just running uranium grit through the isotope separator. And then this is a tough alloy, which I think we've already showed you how to make that. And so that's essentially how to make the reactor. The cells are really easy to make. Glass, tough alloy, and then Enderium coolers. So I had to get some Enderium. And the easiest way to make Enderium, honestly, is instead of the bucket, just put the tank there, and you can make multiple sets of this. And I made 4 of these. So we have just 4 per one, so 16 Enderium ingots total. And these, so we have the coolers now. And I might just make this in the next episode. I'll explain how all the coolers work, because there are multiple of them and they each have a rule associated with them. And so it gets a little complex in a sense. Like this one, it just says it must touch at least 3 reactor casings, which pretty much means it has to be in a corner. And so I made this one because I'm not making a very big reactor right now. Alright, we're going to build it up here. So it's very simple. I'm doing a 2x2 room inside. And these thorium casings also have a rule. So for every casing that is touching another casing, the efficiency is increased. And when you have 2 of them together, it increases to 200%. And efficiency is just a measure of how much power is increased from the base power. So when we have 2 of them, beyond 2, we actually start losing efficiency per block. So then when we have all 4 of them together, it actually equals to 300%. So beyond that, the reactor casings are easy to put down. You just need to make sure that you don't put any in the corners. So this block right here is actually incorrect. We don't have any in the corners. We just want to have some on the sides, so that it looks like it's just touching the internal blocks and covering those up. And then we put in the coolers, which will cool off the reactor. And we put them next to where they will touching 3 sides of the casings. And in the next episode, I'll do a little more explanation about the blocks that go inside of it. But this episode's running short on time. Alright, let's place our Fission Controller. And we have a fully built fission reactor. We just need to get the fuel now. Alright, we have our fuel, and we do want to see what is going to be produced by this. I believe it should be 300% the amount of the base. It's 720. The oxidized version will produce, and so the oxidized version actually will increase that, and the heat is in the negatives, and efficiency is 300%. So the negative heat is good. That means it's not going to melt and create a chain reaction. If the heat per tick was positive, then this heat bar would actually fill up, and when it gets to the top, then it'll do the chain reaction and turn the blocks into lava. And every time I've tested this, the actual controller, which is probably the most expensive part, was the one that melted down first. Alright, let's power this thing on. You need to put the lever near to the controller, and the controller will actually power it on. And there's no radiation with this block, so you don't have to worry about that. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the progress bar will tick down, and then you'll get a depleted version. And so here's the depleted versions of these fuel cells, and you use that to put them inside of a reprocessor. So you put them in a fuel reprocessor, and you get higher level materials from it. And so you can see you get neptunium and you get uranium, and what you do is you will get higher level materials, and your thorium becomes more efficient out of that process. And so you can look up the other fuels, and you'll see which one turns into which after you've ran through the fission reactor with them. So looking at the neptunium and the fuel cells from that, you can see that with that comes energy, and also it also comes the heat. And so we can't run that through this actual fission reactor. We will need to build a bigger fission reactor that can support the heat and the coolers for the heat. So that's kind of the process that you go through. You're essentially expanding your reactors, and you're also needing to probably build additional reactors to go along with this. And that wraps up this episode. The first part of NuclearCraft is done, and we will get into the next part, the next episode. But for now, I thank you for watching, and I appreciate that. And I hope you learned something. So have a good day.